Sharon, Mignery, welcome to the Rocky Mountain Writer Podcast.
Thank you.
It's great
You've
to
been
have you
doing
on.
this for a while. I'm glad to be here.
I've been doing it for a while. I think we're coming up. In May will be the 8th year, I think, of doing podcasts, and but that's only a short portion of time that RMFW has been around. So,
One of the
yeah,
many technological changes that have been to our benefit.
yes. Well, one reason we wanted to talk to you is this is the 40th anniversary of Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers later this year, or I guess we're celebrating it the whole year. So we'll call 2023 the 40th
Yes.
anniversary whole year. And you were there right at the beginning. And so we wanted to chat with you about some of your early memories and help our existing members today understand where this organization has come from and the roots of how this all came together. Because for newbies like me, only 10, 12 years-ish around RMFW, we have so much to be appreciative of your efforts to get this thing up and running because it's meant so much to us. So let's start with can you take us back to some of your first interactions and what that looked like? Where was it? What was the impetus?
Okay. I think in some ways, starting with when I very first found out about it, back in the olden days, this would have been 1983. This was pre-internet, and that's very hard for us to remember pre-internet. And at that point in time, if you didn't have a phone number that was listed in the yellow pages, finding people of like mind was very, very difficult to do. And so we had been down here in Durango, I think, for 4th of July weekend. And because FM radio has no reception as you're driving back through the mountains to Denver, we were listening to KOA AM talk radio. And being interviewed was a woman whose name I found out was Connie Reinhold. And she was talking about a writers' conference that was coming up that was going to be at the Aurora Public Library. And I was waiting with my pen in hand, waiting, hoping that the connection would stay and I wouldn't end up with too much static and I'd be able to get her phone number and the cost and the date and all that other good stuff. And I was. And at the time, I knew I couldn't be the only person in Denver who was writing a book, but I didn't know any other writers. And I was muddling along by myself, and Writer's Digest was the source of my information. And I don't know whether you remember the Writer's Digest market was that
Absolutely.
thick, big book that was, hardcover, but paper thin pages like you have in the phone book. And every place that you could submit for any kind of writing that you could imagine was there. And if you wanted to advertise a service, like being an agent or whatever, you could advertise there. That was our Bible.
The best thing about that was to check and go down the list and see agents that didn't charge reading fees.
Yes. Yeah. And I got sucked into that at one point in time and paid $100 to somebody. I wish I could remember the name of the organization. To read my manuscript and give me feedback on it. And I did probably got my $100 worth on the feedback, but that was part of the learning experience. Don't do that. There's other ways. But at the time, we're also naive when we start, even today, where we have, you can do a Google search and you can find people in ways that we couldn't then. So anyway, I did find the conference, and it was held at the Aurora Public Library in the same building where the Aurora Public Library still is. And about 100 of us crowded into the community room. And it was just one session all day long. We brought our sack lunches and we sat there at the tables and we just soaked in every bit of this stuff that we were learning that day. I wish I could remember the editor's name who was there. I'm thinking Carrie Farron, but I don't think that's right. I think she joined Harlequin shortly thereafter. But Pat Dalton was there, and Pat Dalton was the founder of what was then Rocky Mountain Romance Writers. And they what I found out later was that they had become recognized as a chapter of Romance Writers of America, and they were looking for a way to find new members and also increase their coffers. And it's like every writers' organizations; they start off poor, and our Rocky Mountain Romance Writers was in the same boat as that at the time. And so I think our fee to get into this event was, I'm thinking $50. I don't know whether that was right or not, but I'm thinking it was 50. And so I have 100 women who've come and spend $50 a piece and then take your expenses out of that. As I recall, the conference netted about $2,500, which was huge for the Treasury and did
Sure.
provide the seed money for things that came later. But anyway, Pat Dalton was the driver on all of that. And at the time she first found out about Romance Writers of America, it was just kind of through asking editors questions as she was submitting and hearing, finding out about the industry scuttlebutt. And so she definitely was savvy about all of that. And I remember her telling me very pointedly at one point in time, I want in. And she got in and found Maggie Osborne, who was our very first published author, and somehow or another found Carol Caverly. And Carol was a librarian at the time. So Carol might be able to tell you more about how all that happened. And let's see. Oh, Kay Bergstrom. And Kay was just in the process of getting her first book published. And in fact, at that conference, that was her very first conference promoting a book.
First
And
of 5,000, I think. First of
yeah.
5,000 books, 5 or 6,000 books, I think she's got.
Oh,
just
well,
I'm kidding.
yeah. I think she's written well over 100. But I
Yeah,
mean,
I'm
she's
just kidding.
incredibly prolific. And one of the sad things is she's not that well known. And yet she's an incredibly talented writer, incredibly gifted storyteller. And you just never know, how the gods are going to fall on that. That's a topic for another podcast.
Yeah.
But anyway, it was just really exciting to walk into this room and see real writers, real published writers, because up until that moment, I didn't know any writers. And so I'm always reminded of that moment when I meet new writers who come to our conferences now, who are so starry-eyed and so excited to be in around other writers and discovering this world that they've dreamt about. And I'm meeting real people who are on the same journey I'm on. And that's so exciting. And I remember feeling just like that. I was enthralled and soaking up every little bit of information that I could. And like a lot of newbies, I brought my manuscript with me just in case somebody wanted it. And of course they never do, but I hauled it around anyway. And got to meet Pat Dalton, and I was just, I thought she was a goddess, and she invited me to submit my thing, and the editor who was there invited me to submit. And for the first time ever, when the rejection came, it was still a form rejection. We used to get those mimeographed form rejections that looked like they had been mimeographed since, the beginning of time. But this time it had a personal note on it. This is pretty good. I'd be interested in seeing something else you've done. Not right for us, but keep writing. And so that, that was really positive encouragement. And it took another many years to finally get published. My first book came out in 95. Well, sold in 95 and came out in 97. So my journey was kind of a long one, but it was very, very exciting to just be around all of those writers and to learn everything. And to discover that there were other people interested in doing what I was doing who had knowledge I needed.
Yeah. So when did, in your mind, do you have a year or a place or a time or a specific location where in your mind that first RMFW gathering happened that grew out of the Romance Writers group?
Okay, we became Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers in 1990. And so I can jump ahead to that. But when it all first began, Pat Dalton formed that in the summer, fall, winter of 81, 82. And then they were gathering together, Jasmine Cresswell, about that same time. And so that 81, 82 period was them getting organized and meeting, and they were maybe fewer than 10 members. And by the time they held the conference there in 83 at the Aurora Public Library, they were up to about 20 members. And then another 15 of us joined as a result of that gathering. And so I started going to meetings regularly then, beginning in August of 1983. But it had been going for a good year before then, because I think Maggie was the very first writer of the year, and I think that was 1982. It might have been 81, but I think it was 82, and then 83 was when things kind of got going. And it might have been 83 because it might have been one of those things that happened right before conference. And Kim Phillips, who was the president of the group at that point in time, I remember her telling me that her husband, with his scroll saw, carved out, I think out of a breadboard, made a heart-shaped plaque for her, rather than them even, because they didn't have enough money to go order a plaque. So, yeah.
Wow. Well, jump ahead then, if you don't mind, to that 1990 period.
Okay. We had great critique groups. And critique groups have always been the core thing for our organization. And it's where you meet those people who get to be your buddies, and where you figure out how to be a writer, but where you also really develop very close friendships. And because we were a chapter of RWA, people who wanted to come to critique group needed to join RWA. And if they were writing mysteries or science fiction or whatever, they weren't so excited about that, but they really loved our critique groups. And by 1990, we had 2 critique groups a month going, if you can believe it. That was it, a whole whopping 2. And so one of them was held at somebody's home. We went around from, place to place that was advertised in the newsletter. And then the Capitol Hill critique group formed, that was in the Capitol Hill Community Center there for many, many, many years. Maybe it still is, I don't know. Yeah. And that meant, so we were meeting every 2 weeks. And so because Capitol Hill and in the late 1980s, it was clear we were headed toward eventually disaffiliating from RWA. And that happened the year I was president. And so I was the very last president of romance, Rocky Mountain Romance Writers, and Christine Jorgensen was the very first president of Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers after we disaffiliated. And so that was a ballot measure that was put to our members. And so then, then you've got the problem, okay, we're no longer part of this other thing, now what? And so we knew, hopefully my husband picks that up here, I'll wait just a second in case we need to edit that out. Okay, we're good. So Christine very wisely put together an ad hoc committee for us to discuss what kind of an organization we wanted to be. And the internet was just beginning to be big at that point. And within about 4 months of our disaffiliation from RWA, our membership swelled from about 500. And those growing pains that you have for an organization are painful, because all of a sudden there's a lot of people wanting services that you're just not equipped to provide yet. And so it provided us with the opportunity to really think about what kind of an organization we wanted to be. Do we want to be predominantly a national organization whose most members are in the Denver area, or do we want to be a regional organization whose members may be from other parts of the country? And they eventually decided the latter. And that's why there was a geographic component in for membership for a long time, that you needed to be a resident of the Rocky Mountain region. And I think it was defined as New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, Idaho, and Montana. I think that hits the states. And if you lived outside of that area, you were grandfathered in. Or if you moved outside of that area and you were already a member, you were grandfathered in.
Yeah.
And so that it did eventually go away, but that was the reason why that happened, is we decided we wanted to be a regional organization. Well, then the other thing that we were looking at was looking at other groups that had disaffiliated, and I wish I could think of the name of the group down in Albuquerque that had been, is a fiction writers group as well, but they had originally been an RWA chapter as well. And
Southwest Writers? Southwest Writers? No.
Maybe I don't remember the name of the group. I'd have to go look it up, and I don't want to cast aspersions accidentally on somebody else. But and not that I'm casting aspersions, but they really struggled for a while with their identity of what they were going to be, because they expanded to include poetry and short stories, and at that point in time, neither of those markets were considered very commercial. And so we in this ad hoc committee decided that the focus for RMFW should be on commercial fiction, which by definition was genre novels. And we wanted the emphasis of the organization to be on education and access to professionals and support for writers pursuing novel writing. And so so that we have the three prongs there for what I think is still the basis for how we do most of our business within the organization. So that had its roots there in the leadership that Christine provided when she first became president. And I'm trying to think of who all was on that committee. I think Jim Cole, who was president at one point in time. Did you know Jim?
No, I think so.
Because he had been an engineer who had worked at Lockheed before he retired, and then he moved to somewhere in Kansas or Western Missouri after he retired, and I don't quite remember the dates on that. But anyway, he was very involved, and I think Kay Bergstrom was involved, and I can't remember who else was on that committee. But the thing that we became after that, well, the other thing we were concerned about was empire building. We'd seen some organizations really struggle because they had the same president over and over and over and over again, and the same, secretary over and over and over again. And so that's how we came up with the limitation of how long you can serve on the executive committee before you need to take a break.
Yeah.
And I think that's served us really well, because we've continued to have an influx of new blood into the organization and into the quote power structure unquote of the organization. And I think that served us really well, because we're not stuck in doing things the same old way as they've always been. It's been open to, new technology, new ideas, and new blood, and encouraging that, but at the same time trying to put in place things so that we're not always reinventing the wheel, and you do have people around who remember what was going on, and why the history committee, for example, struggled, and some of that is just keeping track of records. But why don't we have a librarian who holds stuff around anymore? Well, our electronic books changed a lot of that. So it's just trying to think about how to take advantage of technology and evolve, while at the same time remembering who you were.
Yeah. So as the group came together, what would you say some of the things that you were first doing for your members? I mean, I assume there was a newsletter. Were you when was that first conference, or did you start doing workshops?
Okay, we started doing annual conferences in 1980. The very first one I went to was, I said 83, it was 84. We became an organization in 83. And so that very first conference at the Aurora Public Library was in 84. So I probably confused a whole bunch of people by saying 83.
Was
And
that
then,
romance writers only?
yeah,
Though?
that was Romance Writers of,
Okay.
yeah, that was Rocky Mountain Romance Writers.
Right.
And then we've had a conference with a couple of exceptions every year since then. And there was one year that we decided we didn't want a full-blown conference. I think that was 2000. It was not the year of the 9/11 attack. I think it was the year before, or maybe the year after. I don't remember. But that was more of a workshop where we were all like the workshops that we do now, the quarterly workshops. But because, it's a lot of effort to put on a conference, and it's a lot of dollars. And so, our members just seemed to think that having a break that year was a good thing to do. And then we discovered that we weren't serving the needs of our members by not having industry professionals, i.e. editors and agents, available to them. And so then we returned back to doing conferences every year. And so there's been a conference every year since 1984, except for the one year that it was a workshop instead of a conference.
Yeah.
And then we started doing quarterly workshops. And I don't know that it was necessarily quarterly for a while. I think it was more, twice a year maybe, of having workshops, particularly in the spring, where you'd have a speaker come in. And I remember Donald Moss came in one year for that, and people like that, and those were also great in that they attracted other writers from outside of our group, then some of whom became members, but it also helped expand our affiliation with other writers, so that we were doing events together and trading information and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Wow. And you look back, I loved what you said earlier about, the fact you walked into a room with real published writers.
Yeah.
And that just gave you a home. As you
we
look
all
back,
remember what that felt like that
Yeah.
first time.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, can you put in words what Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers has meant to you?
Oh, we think about those turning points in a novel, and this was the turning point in my life, joining RMFW in 1984. It was everything to me. It was the pathway into the thing that I loved doing most in my life. And my very closest friends came out of that. Many of the most memorable experiences of my life came out of that. And for every hour that I put in volunteering, the amount that I get back from the organization in terms of friendships and growth in my career and growth in my own learning is expanded tenfold. It was absolutely life-changing for me.
Yeah, that pretty well covers it. That's a great statement. That's a great endorsement. There is so much to be said about the power of being around others that are, like you said, on the same journey, and just picking up from them. It might be a tip about marketing. It might be a tip about dialogue writing. It might be a tip about, oh, you should meet a friend of mine who's an agent. Or it could be, there's just so many different ways that those conversations go. And
yeah, exactly. Or you'll be at critique group and somebody will say, did you hear about the new imprint that Harlequin is starting? And this sounds like the piece you're working on now would be a great fit for that. And so you just had that networking of knowledge, some of which was formal and some of which was informal, always coming into you. And then the other thing that was really cool about it, in one way, you'd think we're competitors. We're all trying to get published. Well, the reality of it is if every single person who's currently a member of RMFW got published today, there would still be holes in the market for other people to become published. We can't all fill it. And so you soon realize that you're not really competitors, but you're more comrades in arms, where you're marching together toward the same goal, but where the success of one is also uplifting for another. And that's why it's so easy to be congratulatory toward other people when they do have their successes, and why we can be so sympathetic with one another when that rejection comes, particularly if it's from a source that we really, really, really want, and it just is not happening. And others who are not on that journey don't sometimes realize how painful that can be.
Boy, is that true. Yeah, it's so true. And I can, even in my own case, say, the number of writers who helped me, had they thought I was some sort of competition or threat to them, they would not have helped me. But exactly what you said, we can lift all the boats. Everybody can help each other. You're not going to be, taking a slot that is just, that's the only slot, and there's going to be 10 other people left behind. By taking that slot and moving up a little bit, then you reach back and help others, and
exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. So what positions did you hold with the board? I won't hold you to like certain dates or anything, but what positions did you hold?
I was treasurer. I inherited Kay Bergstrom's very famous Girl Scout cookie box of receipts and records. And when I turned it over to the next treasurer, who was Jean Ann Caldwell, and she became our very first recipient for the Jasmine Award, the very first thing Jean Ann said to me was, "These books are out of balance." And I'm thinking, well, at least we're organized enough. We know they're out of balance. They're not in a Girl Scout cookie box anymore. And so, there was a progression with that. So in terms of elected office, I think I've held every position except secretary. I was president, treasurer, vice president. I was PAL liaison at one point in time. I've done the It's a Book mailer. I did that for a couple of years. I was the newsletter editor back when we were still printing. And in fact, when I was doing the It's a Book, we were still printing at that point in time also. I've been conference co-chair 5 times, I think.
Wow.
I was co-chair for the contest. And I know there's some people who've done that for years and years and years. Oh my goodness, do I have such admiration for them. I was one of the last ones doing it by paper. And I think Terry Wright was the one who got us into the electronic age of electronic submissions. But that was a huge job, being a contest chair prior to it being electronic, because you had piles of manuscripts in your house that you were trying to get divided up and then sent where they needed to go. Then for 2 years, I was the administrator for RMFW University, and loved that. Really wanted to see that be a success. I've loved everything I've done. I can't think, the second year I was president was a tough year, because that was the year that Colorado Romance Writers formed. And when they formed, it was not an immediately amicable break. And so that was tough on our organization. But, over time, people forget all of those old arguments and you get to be friends again. And so that all, now there's good relationships with almost all of those groups. And of course, with the blow up that Romance Writers of America had a couple years ago, I'm not sure whether there's any Romance Writers of America chapters left in Denver or in Colorado. I don't know whether they're still around. I haven't kept track.
Wow, Sharon, you have really served this organization and given a lot to it. And I know you also teach a lot of classes at the conference. That's another thing that you've done.
I love teaching. Love it.
Yeah. I mean, usually you're giving 3 or 4 workshops per conference, if I'm not mistaken.
This last time, I thought they went a little overboard. And that was kind of where my ego got in the way. You always submit several proposals, hoping one of them will be accepted. And they accepted all 4 of mine. And so my little ego swelled up and I was so proud of myself. Would you like to do all 4? Sure. And then after I started working on them, I thought, well, Sharon, what in the heck were you thinking? And oh, by the way, there's other people here who need this.
So we switched locations so Sharon has access to power for her laptop, and we so appreciate that. And you were just talking about the fact that you were teaching 4 workshops at the last conference.
Yeah.
Maybe feeling a bit overwhelmed.
Yeah, at first I was just so excited. All 4 of them got accepted, and I said yes. And I'm glad I did it. And I always, there's an adage, teach what you want to learn. And so there was a couple of ideas that I had of new things I wanted to learn. And so I had the opportunity to explore those. But 4 workshops is too many.
Yeah.
Note to self, don't do that again.
Are you planning to be there in September this year?
Of course.
Yeah, of course.
I'm pretty sure they might have to cancel if I didn't come.
Yeah. Well, you and I live about, I think, probably 40 miles apart or so in Southwest Colorado.
Correct.
25 miles from me over to Durango, and then how far up to Lemon Reservoir?
I'm exactly 20 miles from town.
Okay, so we're 45 miles apart, and it's a good
Yeah.
6.5, 7 hour drive up to Denver. But
Yes.
we will, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. Well, as we wrap up here, one thing I wanted to ask you about is what's new with your writing? You've got, what about, I'm going to say 10 books out, something like
12.
that? 12.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I have one other finished that I'm marketing, and it keeps getting rejected. And I think part of it is publishers don't quite know how to slot it. Is it women's fiction, or is it romance, or it's a story about a couple who is reconciling, who've been married for 20 years. And when I first started working on it, I thought, well, that could be sort of boring because, it's not a brand new romance. But in some ways, your conflicts are deeper because you know one another's coping mechanisms and one another's hot buttons. And so I found, and then you've also got the issue with extended family with your kids and whatnot. And so I found it really fun to work on. I think it's a good story. And I'm just about to the point where if I don't find a publisher here within the next few months, I'll bite the bullet and go the route of many of my other friends who've had great success with self-publishing.
Gotcha. What's the working title on that one?
The working title is, oh my goodness. I've had several working titles on it. I may have to go look. Hang on just a second.
Okay,
I can look this up. I can go look up on my directory and figure out what the title. That's embarrassing. What is the title?
If this were the early days of RMFW, no internet, you wouldn't be able to do that.
No, I would not. So, Almost Perfect.
Ah, there you go.
There you go.
That's great.
Almost Perfect.
That's great.
Yeah, and it's hopefully the first in 3 related books. And so one of the related books was the one I'm working on right at the moment. And I'm going, wait, nope, that's the wrong title. Whoops.
Well, when will you make that decision to go?
Probably, it takes forever for things to work through publishers and agents. So it's submission, and I'm thinking if I don't hear back from the editor here within another, by early summer, I'll make the decision to go the other way.
Yeah. Well, that's great. And even though you live in Southwest Colorado, like I do, and I don't know about you, but back in the day when I lived in Denver and there was lots of regular kind of monthly get-togethers and those day-long education programs, sometimes in May and Golden or even in Denver, some of them. But I still feel very connected to RMFW and the community, thanks to the internet and email and social media and all that.
Well, and thanks to a lot of the programs that the organization has put together through the outreach, they've got an active group over in the Grand Junction area, and I've been over there several times to do their summer workshops. and that's really fun. So, and then thanks to Zoom technology came on at the perfect time.
Yep.
And I know several of us belong to Zoom critique groups, and thank goodness for them.
Thank goodness. Well, Sharon Mignery, thank you so much for all you have done for RMFW over the years. And thank you so much for your reminiscences today and for sharing some stories about the history of RMFW. We really appreciate it.
My total pleasure. And thank you for the podcasts. This is one of those technology changes that's absolutely for the benefit of our members. And I'm so grateful that you've taken that project on. It's great for us. And I love seeing your interviews.
Thank you, Sharon. You have a great day and week, and we'll see you in Denver in September.
Okie doke, or maybe here sooner.
Maybe.